He's about to spend 270 days in complete isolation on Mars, with no access to food or water, to complete a high-risk mission that could determine whether Earth survives or not. Mars is just a tiny dot in the sky, 40 million miles away. There's no life or death there, but one man wants to bring it to life. With 14 hours until launch, the captain arrives at the base and prepares for the flight. William Stanford will be the first person to reach Mars, and Captain Maddox will follow to set up a base for future colonizers. Their journey will take 270 days. A man in an astronaut suit is preparing for the launch of his spacecraft. At that moment, he's reflecting on his mission and its purpose. Most people on Earth don't understand why he's doing this. He's giving up his life and heading for a barren planet. They don't realize it won't always be that way. Stanford knows this is a one-way mission, but he's not planning to die. He's going to Mars to live. Finally, the spacecraft launches and ventures into deep space. After some time, the captain checks in with Earth. The team in Houston supports him and is anxious for his progress. Skinny suggests they double-check all the life support systems to ensure everything is functioning properly. As time passes, William goes through his daily routine: eating, watering the plants, exercising, showering, and at night, he records his thoughts. On the 12th day, Skinny checks in again, announcing that a video conference with students will start soon. Reluctantly, the captain agrees and puts on his uniform. One of the students asks how he's planning to survive on Mars if he actually makes it there. Stanford explains that the ship has all the necessary supplies, but the biggest challenge is water. There's never enough. That's why he invented a reactor capable of producing it. It's similar to the fuel cells in the ship, like an electric car where the main product is energy and the byproduct is drinking water. But his reactor runs on dirt. He developed a process to extract hydrogen and oxygen from the soil, and by recombining them, he was able to produce water. No one thought it would work, which is why he went alone into the Atacama Desert without water. It was his only chance. Either he'd die, or he'd create the reactor. On the first day, he fixed all the flaws. His throat was dry without water, but it was bearable. On the second day, he continued working, but his mind started to fade without hydration. Stanford could have called for help, but he decided he'd manage on his own. On the third day, he restarted the reactor, and it worked. Clean drinking water flowed from the tube. At that moment, he knew it would work on Mars. And now, he's leaving Earth and flying to a barren planet. He knows all of humanity is behind him. Day by day, he lives his life aboard the spacecraft Zephyr. He reflects on his mission, the future, tends to his plants, dances, and checks the shuttle systems. One day, Skinny contacts him again. 800 hours of flight have passed. Stanford asks about the weather on Mars. Skinny replies that it's about -10 degrees Celsius, and cold clouds are approaching, dropping the temperature to -80 degrees Celsius. The captain simply smirks. Skinny can't understand why he isn't worried. Doesn't he feel afraid? With a smile, the captain answers that of course, he's concerned, but he tries to focus on what he can control. This conversation takes him back to his memories of the Atacama Desert and his attempts to create water using a reactor. Returning triumphantly to the base, he shares his success with Skinny. Stanford is confident that with this technology, they'll be able to colonize Mars in just 5 years. On Earth, candidates for the next Mars mission are being selected. Sitting in his cabin, the captain watches their interviews. After some time, Skinny calls again. He calls out several times, but the captain doesn't respond. At that moment, he's sitting in the corner, reading a book, so lost in thought that he doesn't hear his name. Realizing it too late, Stanford rushes to the monitor. With a sigh of relief, Skinny tells him that in 20 miles, he'll make his last stop at a space station for refueling and resupplying. The captain knows this is the last place he'll see people in person. After docking, Stanford heads to the station, where he meets the engineer and the captain. Both men are clearly emotionally drained. As they walk through the lab, the captain sees that all of their plant and lab mice, part of an experiment, are dead. The failures have driven them to despair. The engineer asks Stanford to complete the mission and return to Earth, unsure of what lies ahead and how difficult it will be. Stanford, surprised by such words, remains optimistic and has no intention of turning back. Their conversation is interrupted by the station captain. The launch of the second spacecraft is about to begin. The men watch the shuttle launch on the monitor as Captain Maddox's shuttle lifts off. With tears in his eyes, Greenstreet leaves, and behind Stanford, Captain Worsley appears, urging him to think again. He doesn't understand what Stanford is agreeing to if he continues this mission. Back on his ship, Stanford returns to his routine. He talks to students, sharing his life story, how his divorce from his wife affected him. That day, Kessie won a literary award and celebrated it with her circle of friends, while he simply walked away. Walking through the streets, he gazes at the enormous moon. Surrounded by people, none of them noticed him, and in that moment, he realized the true meaning of loneliness. By evening, he returned home. He stood on his porch, watching people celebrate, while his wife shone in the crowd. The captain knew he should be with her, but he couldn't bring himself to enter the house. It was as though absolute solitude had consumed him. Later, Stanford discovers a small problem with the reactor. However, it doesn't really bother him. He's confident he can fix it. In fact, it's almost a relief. It's the first real challenge he's had in his routine. Before going to bed, he reflects on his visit to the station. Greenstreet and Worsley had lost hope, probably because their experiments had failed and their families were waiting for them back home. But Staniford wouldn't allow himself to fail. He couldn't let the feelings of disappointment and longing take over. In the following days, the man tries to repair the reactor, keeps a journal, and exercises. At night, the captain wakes up from a nightmare and decides to contact Maddox. However, she isn't too happy to hear from him at such a late hour over something so trivial. Later, Stanford receives calls from his nephews and relatives wishing him a happy birthday. Afterward, he resumes speaking with the students and tending to his plants. At some point, he attempts to reach Maddox again, only to realize that there's no connection. The signal is lost. However, Skinny manages to get through and informs him that the second captain is having some issues. After some effort, they finally establish a connection with her and learn that she's having problems with the gyroscope, causing her ship to veer off course. William immediately suggests a few ways to fix it. Skinny is not thrilled with his impromptu solutions, but the captain reassures his friend that he knows the ship and its capabilities better than anyone. Under Stanford's careful guidance, Maddox manages to fix the issue, improve the signal, and stabilize it. She thanks the captain, hoping there won't be any more malfunctions and that they'll eventually reach the same destination. The man continues watching interviews with candidates for the next mission, exercises, tends to his plants, and listens to various sounds before sleep. Bird songs, people laughing, music. At one point, he notices a solar flare and rushes to the porthole to observe it. One day, the reactor completely breaks down. He decides to reconnect it to another battery, but a short circuit occurs, and the man watches as the drinking water reservoir gets contaminated. After inspecting the tank, he realizes he's lost 2/3 of his water supply. While documenting everything, he considers reporting the issue to Skinny but ultimately decides it's not critical yet. The captain calculates how much water he has left and figures out his daily ration. Over the following days, Stanford drinks only 600 milliliters of water. He hasn't reported the issue to the base because if Skinny finds out, they'll force him to end the mission and return home. Approaching the plants again, the man realizes that the water for their watering has run out. He tries to repair the reactor again, just as Skinny contacts him. The captain lies, saying the reactor is fine and that he's just performing routine maintenance. Later, he devises a plan to fix the breakdown, but things go wrong, and part of the reactor burns out. In that moment, he recalls his failed attempts to gather water in the Atacama Desert. Before going to bed, Skinny appears on the monitor again. He informs Stanford that Maddox is being sent back to Earth since the gyroscopes on her ship are completely malfunctioning. He asks Stanford to promise that he'll manage on his own, but if anything goes wrong for him, the mission will have to be called off. In the following days, the man struggles to find a solution. The isolation and despair grow stronger with each passing day. One day, he has an idea on how to extract condensation from the remains of the plants. He pulls them out of the ground, places them in a container, adds a small cup of poison, seals everything with plastic, and hides it in a dark place. In his journal, he writes down all his thoughts. Suddenly, he sees a light through the porthole, and hope fills him again as he returns to working on the reactor. With joy, he discovers that it worked, and the glass fills with clean water. Drinking it eagerly, he fills a new glass, only to realize it's contaminated. In a fit of anger, he throws the cup to the floor. Some time passes, and he grabs a container, drinking the accumulated condensate from the small cup. He tries again to fix the reactor, but once more, he fails. In a burst of frustration and despair, he yells at the ship, calling it a pile of junk. Then, calming down, he apologizes to the shuttle. When Skinny checks in next, Staniford admits the reactor is dead, and his attempts to repair it have poisoned the drinking water supply. The man immediately responds that the protocol for returning to Earth must be initiated. However, there are still a couple of days left, so maybe something can be fixed. William says he's tried everything and knows this ship better than anyone. Empty from failure, the captain waits for the ship to bring him home. He knows he's let everyone down and failed at his task. Writing his thoughts down, he remembers everything that happened in the desert. When he finally managed to get water, his body was so weak that he couldn't even take a sip. Only sheer willpower saved him. He returned to the camp and knew he would eventually make the trip to Mars. Despair had completely taken over the captain, with bursts of anger giving way to apathy. Skinny contacts him again and says it's time for him to go home. Remembering why he's there, Stanifort cuts off Houston's control and takes the helm himself. He decides to continue his mission. Skinny tries to talk him out of it, warning him that he can't reach the planet alone, but Stanifort shuts off the communication. Time passes, and the captain drifts somewhere in space. He doesn't know his exact coordinates, only hoping someone will eventually read his log. If his calculations are right, he'll reach his destination soon. If not, he'll fly past Mars by hundreds of thousands of miles. He continues his routine, checking the life support systems, eating, sleeping, but he's lost hope in his mission. Despair and guilt have consumed his life. He feels sorry for Skinny, who keeps trying to contact him, but he won't let him. The man is completely broken and empty, and increasingly, the thought of stepping out into space without a suit and simply dying there crosses his mind. One day, Skinny's voice cuts through. He desperately calls out to Stanifort, warning him about storms. However, the signal is unstable, and the captain only manages to make out a warning about a magnetic storm. Eventually, he sees that he's nearly reached his goal and suits up. As he approaches Mars' atmosphere, he contacts Houston and reports that he has arrived. In 3 minutes, he'll land on Mars. Successfully landing, he reconnects with the base, but all he hears is silence. Stepping out of the spacecraft, he surveys the surrounding landscape. There's no life here, no death, but William Stanifort still holds on to the hope that he might survive. Would you head back home, or, against all odds, press on and become the first person to set foot on Mars? Share your thoughts in the comments down below, give a thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next videos.